Someone asked me how things are going, and I said, well, I think it's gotten better each week in terms of my observation of people's engagement in what was going on. Someone said, did every single person speak? I said, no. I said, I have some quiet people in my class, and they like to learn by listening. They don't like to really get engaged. And so I'm hesitant to go call on them. So far for me to do that, although watch me in a moment of witness, ask one or two of you who don't normally speak, what is your thought on this? But if you want to be asked, I'm willing to ask. And fortunately, because we attended worship by internet, I had my meals all done. I don't have to eat while I'm still trying to lead the group. That's really wonderful. Uh, Jason, do you want to talk to us about the
Sure. Yeah, I just wanted to send out a reminder to everyone, let everyone know that last week after our class, I think I sent, or maybe it was before, I don't remember, but I had sent out an email with a link to what we're calling a Google Classroom, and a number of, I would say maybe a handful, 8, 9 people joined that classroom, and there was a couple comments back and forth. And just wanted to remind folks that that is a possibility. Again, there is no need to do that. But I didn't want anyone to miss out on that if that's something they were interested in. If there's a place for dialogue in between sessions, and the documents that we use each week are also there, as well as the recordings. I will go ahead and send an email out to this group again with that link, if that's helpful. Again, no pressure to do that, but just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that that was an option if that's something folks were interested in.
and I want to thank you, Jason, for doing that. I have to admit that I didn't go right away, and so I didn't start the process, and so I'm hoping to get there this week. my my memory is, yeah, like a steel sieve. All righty. So
I'm sorry,
today,
real quick. I'm actually going to post it in the chat right now, but I will also send out an email later.
okay, so I'm going to assume everybody got their. Oh, no, that's interesting.
It's blur.
I wonder, do I have a blurry thing on my screen?
Well, it's because your background is blurred. Um,
Is my background?
it
Why is my background?
Everything that's not a face will get blurred for you. So
Well, that's
that's the
strange.
beauty of
Can I
technology.
control that?
You can.
I'll have to go on and do that later. I don't want to take up people's time for me to do that. Sorry about that. Okay, so you got the handout that got sent to everybody, and I'll just assume that if you have anything you want to address from that, you can raise that. And I'm really curious about your thoughts about where the committee has us going today. Time to be bold, a time to be humble. It isn't exactly Ecclesiastes. What was it? Ecclesiastes 13, is it, or 3? Somebody know really well. 3. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. All right, so it was one of two for me. I knew there was a 3 in a somewhere, Gene. So they have these two things, and I think it makes sense. There does seem to me to be within the Christian walk a place for being assertive and a place for being willing to take a back seat. Uh, Susan, I was impressed at the end of our session. You and Jason had signaled that you wanted to say something, and I got to Jason. But then as I was there, you backed out. I don't know, you maybe you saw that the time was coming up to an end and we wouldn't have time to go further. But I thought that was an act of humility that not everyone would do, but I respect that. I want to thank you for that. But I want to give you a first shot today. If that issue is still burning in you and you're kind of wishing you had, uh, fire away.
I forgot what the issue was. I don't know what it
You,
was.
you're in friendly company.
It clearly wasn't that urgent.
Okay, very good. I'm relieved. Okay, very good. So today we've had, instead of one scripture that we're kind of primarily focusing on, we've got three, and they're not insignificant scriptures. Um, the Genesis one, and for that I'm going to be very dependent on Christina. If you ask any questions about the meaning of any given word, we will be asking her. She knows better than I. What I know in about Hebrew could probably be put into a thimble. Um, but I've been able to work in it, but I don't really remember my vocabulary as well. Um, and then the other one is Luke. We've been there before. We've been a good bit in Luke actually through this series, and in First John, one of my favorite readings. I did want to ask a word about two words actually. Uh, the word that's found in the Shokin translation as the innocent and the guilty. In our translation in the book, it's called the righteous and the wicked. Do you have anything that just rolls off the top of your head, Christine, about the underlying words for those in Genesis? I see you're looking around for your space bar to push to be able to talk. I see your mouth moving and
Yeah, there we
there
go.
you go.
Okay, your question is,
I'm curious in Genesis 18
okay.
in I assume in verse 25 both of these words are found. One is the word that is translated either as righteous or as innocent. And the other word is the word for wicked or for guilty.
Yeah, right. Righteous. Yeah, those are two big important terms. One, the righteous or innocent is tzaddik,
But
tzedakah, righteousness, doing what is right. Um, So the righteous are those who do what is right. I don't think it means necessarily they never do anything wrong, but just that they are people who strive to do what is right. And Rasha, the wicked, are those who don't do what's right. It's a contrast here. And I'd say it's a really common contrast, these two terms, tzaddik and Rasha.
as you know, in the Greek translation of the Hebrew text, the word that's translated as for the righteous is also a word used for justice.
Mm-hmm.
Is that true in the Hebrew as well?
Well, there's also mishpat, but mishpat and tzedakah are really close. Mishpat is the one that's usually
Justice.
justice,
Okay.
but they're really closely associated terms,
Okay.
synonyms almost. Yeah.
And then they get blended in the Greek. Yeah. Outstanding. Okay. Well, one of the things that has often fascinated me is that how many people are uninformed as to in the Genesis story about Sodom and Gomorrah that uh, the evil, mean, wicked, bad, and nastiness of that's my term for it, Chris. The evil, mean, wicked, bad, and nastiness of Sodom um, was well known long before the angels made their visit. It's talked about in Genesis let's see, 17. God is speaking to God's self in that particular moment, thinking, I wonder if I should tell Abraham about what I'm going to do in Sodom and Gomorrah. And then finally decides, yes, I should do this. And then in verse 20, which is not in our reading, in verse 20, this is where God says, I've heard an outcry from the parts of the woods, and I've got to do something. So the outcry is heard long before the episode of the angels being mobbed and gang raped and who knows what all, but they didn't fare too well. And but that comes much later. A lot of people like to look at that and say that, well, the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah is a particular sexual orientation. And that misses the point altogether. It's far more of anything the failure to have a care for the community. If you look at Ezekiel, who spells it out, it really kind of been a fascinating part. Ezekiel 16:49 and following, it spells out the nature of the sin of Sodom, and the rabbis and the who wrote the commentaries on this spent a lot of time dealing with the very nature of it in terms of not caring for the poor, not paying attention to the needs of the needy. That's the underlying issue. It's an insensitivity to our siblings in life. But you, I think, as a group, probably have already heard that multiple times, so that doesn't come as a shock for you all. So that in the Genesis one, we're dealing with the dichotomy between right relationships and unhealthy relationships. We're dealing with a dichotomy between forgiveness and refusal to move on. And we're dealing with I think that those both tie into the issue of humility and boldness. The thing of humility is that it's those who live in the life of humility, not humiliation and not self-deprecation, are much more likely to be sensitive to the other person's needs, the need for acceptance or whatever. Yeah, go ahead, Susan.
So I'll take my turn from last week now. I've been going through and reading, starting at the beginning, the Bible. I've read the New Testament. I haven't really just gone through the Old Testament, not at least with the concentration that I'm doing now. What struck me is that apparently the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah started long, like you said, long before the angels came. And there's also an incident in Genesis 14 where they're at war. Everybody was at war with each other all the time. It was just what they did. And so the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah were at war with Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, king of Golam, king of Shinar. So they're all going to battle, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah lost, right? So the kings, apparently there's some tar pits or mud pits or something. They went and hid there, and the survivors of Sodom and Gomorrah apparently went back into their towns. Here it says, they fell into them, but those who survived fled to the hill country. Then they took all the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food supply and departed. They also took Lot, Abram's nephew, and his possessions and departed, for he was living in Sodom. So apparently the Sodomite soldiers went and looted their own people and then went to go and survive in the hillside. So again, you talk about not care for the community. they took all the food from their own people. And they also, and which when Abraham goes on a rescue mission for Lot after that. So apparently they were just not being so great for a long time on a variety of fronts.
Thanks for giving a little bit of extension of the background. That's very helpful. Thanks, Susan. So I'm curious with that background. I think the Luke one you probably have pretty well settled with that one, but I think some background on this one really does help. So what are the issues that kind of emerged for you as being things that were either less clear or maybe too clear from the author? I mean, this is our chance now to pick on the author. By the way, Lynn, I thought the quartet was fantastic today. Thank you very much. So what are the things that you might have to want to explore today from these texts? I'm ready with a quiz. If you don't have any questions, I could.
Oh, in that case, I better speak up really quickly here. I don't want to be quizzed on this.
I know.
I looked at this lesson, John David, the text. Well, it annoys me when they put together three texts like this, three little chunks from all over the place. And then you have a couple hundred words to write about all three. That really annoys me about when anybody does that. I know it happens with the universal lesson sometimes. It took a while. They're really putting together three texts about prayer, aren't they? So this is, they don't really say that, but a time to be bold, a time to be humble. This is about in prayer. And then I'm looking at the guide, and it's, praying for wisdom, the daily lessons. So I guess what I'm taking from this is they're suggesting that there are times to be bold in prayer, the way Abraham is in Genesis. And there are other times when we should be more self-deprecating before God. That's the Luke passage. I mean, is this how you put the three together in when you're
To the degree that one can put them together, I think the issue of prayer is a good one. They're focusing on the external language, bold and humility, but it really does come down to a sense of how you think about prayer. And the trouble is, the understanding of what prayer is not the same in each of these.
So which one's right? Who's right, John David?
Well, we'll have to find that out, won't we? I have struggled with the issue of prayer. I think partly because of my finding a sense of solace in my faith to think in more process theology ways. And it's a result of that both has learned it coming to enhance and diminish my notion of prayer. By diminish, I mean from the way I used to think. When I was a little kid, I remember two things about prayer. One of the things is you're supposed to thank God for everything. So I remember when it was my turn to say prayer of thanks around the table, I remember one time not remembering the name of the machine that washes clothes, but I reached back behind me and pointed to that thing with my eyes closed so that God would know what I was pointing at and saying, God, thank you for the new, and then my mother said, clothes washer. Or maybe it was I don't know, whatever. Maybe it wasn't dishwasher. We didn't get those when I was a kid. But so it was sort of like a time of thanks. The other thing I remember from that age, 5, 6, 7, something like that, was that uh, it was confusing to me whether or not it was Santa Claus, like you what you wish for and then something will come to you, or whether it was I was supposed to ask for things. If pray really hard if there's something, someone was sick or whatever it was, and so I did, but I never really understood that because as I grew up, then I began to find the things about, don't be worried about the things that even the sinners also need. God already knows that. And then I get to thinking about, well, if Priscilla Blotchkis is in the hospital and very poorly, um, God knows this. Why would I tell God this? And if I'm wanting Priscilla Blotchkis to get well, I mean, you all know her. If I tell Priscilla Blotchkis to get well, God already knows that. So why am I telling God what God should do? That seems very presumptive of me. That's been a problem for me for a long, long while. I've gotten two sayings that have come to help me in my understanding of prayer, and it either will help you, and I don't, that would be cool, but I don't want it to hurt anybody because uh, I don't want to dissolve anything that prayer is for you. There is that of me that thinks there is great power in prayer. There is that of me that doesn't have a clue as to what it is. So I found two sayings. Here's the first one. Prayer is giving access to God's presence in one's thoughtful will. Prayer is giving access to God's presence in a thoughtful will. In a biblical sense, the word heart's there. So to pray is to allow God into our being, God who's already in us, but nonetheless, we are giving our attention to that of God within us. Second saying is prayer is more participation than petition. And that makes a lot of sense. In my prayers for Priscilla, I'm participating with her at a distance as best I can. And my prayer for her, especially if I'm trying my best to pray all the time, unceasingly, I'm aware of Priscilla until she gets home, because then I'll find out about it probably, or I will make an effort to find out about it. So that is that participation rather than petition, where I'm asking God to do X, Y, or Z. God already knows all these things. God's already doing God's best. But maybe somehow in my sharing participation, God is able to use the energy that I release. And I'm going mystical, aren't I? But anyhow, that's kind of in my thought. Now, that saying can also be used. Prayer is more a process than it is a product. And that one has meaning for me too. So I don't know if these three are exclusively intended to be about prayer, but it certainly triggered that I wanted to bring these two things that have been helpful to me to share with you. I'm glad you asked that question because I could get it out right away before I forget it. What about the rest of you?
Yeah, David, I'm sorry. Can you repeat the first one again? I got the second one. Prayer is more participation than petition. What was the first one that you shared? That
Prayer is
was
giving access to God's presence in one's thoughtful will. And yeah.
John David, I just wanted to say that you actually have a line very similar to that in this study on page 49. You have prayer is a matter of giving God's presence access to one's heart. And I had that underlined, or our thoughtful will, because it reminded me of when you uh, download download an app on your computer and it says, do you allow access to all of your photos? Or, and I'm
Yes.
always like, no, I don't want you to like infiltrate my whole system here. But I do want to use you. But God is kind of saying, hey, if you download me, I'm taking over. Is that okay? Um, and I think often we're like, maybe just this part would be okay, but maybe not all.
Yeah. Well, I have the same reaction to apps, and I love your analogy of the app. Boy, that and that's it. That's at least what, well,
Mm.
sometimes things that have been part of my growth have a way of leaking into products that come out. I have no idea who told me this phrase. Uh, it's long lost, but it has taken root, evidently.
Mm.
Oh,
Yes, go ahead.
Paul and Sandy, go
Okay.
ahead. Yes.
Well, I
I'm
was just
sorry. Yeah,
thinking,
I should have said apologize.
oh, that's okay. I was looking around to see if someone else had their hand up. Um, I always think that prayer for myself is almost more of a change of attitude in my own heart, that it helps me. So for example, if I'm annoyed with someone and I take that to God in prayer, usually I come back feeling like, okay, this isn't all that person's fault. Some of it might be my own, and I need to change my attitude and be better with my attitude. So it's just, so it is asking for something, but I feel like I get something more of a strengthening in my heart than maybe waiting for God to intervene in some miraculous way. It's more subtle.
It's a miracle what God can do in our lives when we are open to the change of our hearts. I mean, that itself is his own miracle, isn't it? Yeah, but there again, we have the app is there, prayer is available to us, but we do have to click the accessibility possibilities, and that fits within this concept for me because it is. I'm hesitant to say that all God does is just change me. There is something about the community process when we say we are in prayer for you. That means something different than when I say I'm going to pray for you. But even if I say I'm going to pray for you, that's different than if I just simply go and do pray for somebody. I hope that made sense. I never am sure it's coming across very helpful a bit. Susan?
I mean, I think prayer for changing attitude is a terrific thing. I mean, I think that's what Jesus meant when he talked about knock on the door and it will be opened. But I remember years and years ago reading an article about the improved, I think there's also an actual objective, measurable benefit to prayer. And I remember reading an article years ago about the increased positive outcomes for hospital patients who are prayed for versus those, sorry, I'm getting my glass of water away from my cat, versus those who were not prayed for.
And that whether they knew about it or not, which I
Well,
read
exactly.
I also read the original article on that, and that was a fascinating thing. That really satisfied a lot of things for me. I then firmly went back into thinking, okay, we all have to say our prayers, make sure they go out, and that's going to have an impact.
Well,
And then they did later research and found out that there was no statistic viability to it. So,
well, except there was another study because people were trying to address the whole question of, okay, but they knew they were being prayed for. And some scientists had, some amoeba, bacteria, whatever it is, and they infected it with some kind of a virus. And then some bacteria are prayed for and some bacteria weren't. And the bacteria that were prayed for recovered at a higher rate. So one can assume the bacteria didn't know that they were being prayed for. So I thought that was an interesting addendum to that whole question.
I don't remember. I did not read the one about amoeba. I did read the one, but even in the original one, some people were prayed for and they knew it. Some people were prayed for and they didn't know it. And the original survey that it was under question, all of that got dismissed absolutely. Now, if there's been something on amoeba, it'd be interesting to see. I'd like to know a lot more about it. But anyhow, if it is part of participation in the process, one of my friends talks about it as releasing his energy to the great energy of life. And I thought that's maybe a poetic way of getting at it, but that does allow for a person to be releasing their energy and being attentive. I think also, if I'm praying for someone, I'm going to be more attentive to them just in general. Let's see. Paul or?
Yeah, I just had a comment. I mean, I've always had questions about prayer and the benefit and how it works and all that for years. And then our small group here at Elizabethtown read a book by, I think it was Philip Yancey, called Prayer. Mm-hmm. And it's a pretty comprehensive book. It's pretty thick. It looks at this, trying to look for scientific evidence of how it helps, and gives stories, how people, and at the end of the book, it basically, it was very, very difficult to say 100% what prayer did for anybody. It was very difficult. I mean, people had stories, and then Yancey went into his last chapter. He talked, and that's kind of was his assessment. It's kind of really, really difficult to say what prayer does. I mean, it's hard to prove.
It is.
And then at the very end, the last chapter, he gave a story that happened, I think, after the book was written, where he was involved in an accident in a very far out area in Arizona or New Mexico or someplace like that, where he was involved in an auto accident, and he was hurt pretty badly. And he said the first thing he did was pray. And I thought that was interesting. And he said, and just as he was praying, a young couple came up. Very unlikely that anybody was going to be on this road that he was on, because he had taken a back road to go somewhere. And so, after going through this whole book and trying to understand what prayer was, we really can't understand it, but he still practiced it, and it seemed like his prayer was answered. And I thought that was a very interesting thing. And the one other story I want to tell is, I was involved in a prayer meeting one time years ago where there was a young lady who had brain cancer. This was a child, and the people who led the prayer meeting said, if there's anyone in this room who questions whether God is going to cure this young lady of this prayer, of this disease, then this prayer meeting will probably not work. And I was sitting there as a young doctor thinking of the improbability of this cure. And it made me feel like they were talking to me, and I felt like I should get up and leave. Unfortunately, the young lady did not survive. I mean, she died. She had a very bad illness. And I just think, prayer can be weaponized. I guess that's the other thing I want to say. Yeah.
And right. I think exactly. Well, before I go, Keith, you waited a good while for this. Go for it, brother.
Okay, well, I'm John David. I'm going to be a little bit irreverent. Um, and
That's so unlike you, Keith.
I sort of ranked these three passages in terms of how helpful it was for me to think about prayer. And in third place would be the First John passage. I think it's sort of confusing, and it does convey, on the surface level anyway, a sense that God is a vending machine, which you shared in some of your comments earlier, which to me is a pretty narrow um, and unhelpful view of prayer. The Luke passage I would rank number two, in that this was all about individual self-interest in talking with God. The tax collector was very confessional, very meek and humble and asking for forgiveness. Uh, the Pharisee was sort of not asking for forgiveness, but telling God, "You should respect me because of who I am." But it was all about him. And I would rank the Genesis passage as the most helpful one to me, because I think it was saying something about the writers trying to dialogue with God and understand more, not just get God's saving activity for them, but trying to interact with God and say, well, what's your take on righteousness and wickedness, and um, are you going to wreak havoc and devastation on no matter who, because the sinners outnumber the righteous? And wasn't so much asking for something for themselves as to try to dialogue with God and understand. So that was sort of my take. And so if you rank them one, two, and three, I would say that's my ranking. And maybe First John, we just clip those two verses out of the text and move on.
There at the end is the singer of lack of piety. Go ahead, Twila, give a comeback. Let's hear it.
I didn't like the Genesis passage.
Oh,
I have to keep my finger down because God's making a deal with this human. And finally, your last point is, at each point along the way, God yielded to the grace side of the argument without completely yielding the need for justice. I just think, why on earth didn't Abraham go all the way to one person? And you say God didn't want to completely yield the need for justice. I don't think God, I don't like that. So in fact, if there would have been only one person, then God would have said, nope, can't do it, because justice has to be the winner here. Well, what kind of justice is that? I have real problems with that.
well, I think that's an understandable reaction. What I do like about Keith's struggle to come to grips with what's going on here, he's looking for what's in the conversation, trying to test the waters, to learn something in the process, rather than to try to outwit or outmatch or drive guilt into God until God does what Abraham thinks should be done. The language of conversation is a really neat one. I love it. I just wish I had more direct conversations like that went both ways. I mean, if I had those, I could learn a lot. I really love that. So as a story, it's a great one because it produces that. So my problem probably is I just don't wait long enough until God clears his throat or her throat and speaks mind. I don't have enough patience to get the feedback. But the issue of justice uh, in in Abraham's opening salvo, he's working at that issue of, where is it going to go? And you said something about something I was saying. I was trying to think, where did I say that? I missed something here, but
It's the last sentence on page 46. I think these are your words.
At each point along the way, God yielded to the grace side of the argument without completely yielding the need for justice. To me, that's an important point. God is not going to simply say, as long as there's one person, I'll save everyone. Then it comes out that God's saying, I don't really care much for justice. I'm only going to work as a graceful God. I'm going to let everything be hunky-dory. And throughout the Bible, there's constant tension between justice and mercy. There's one of the prophets who talks about the anticipation of a time when justice will kiss mercy. And there's something powerful about that imagery. I just love that imagery. I do believe that the reality of life is we tend to be held accountable for our behavior. So there is justice. But somehow with that, what all of us yearn for is some way to not be completely obliterated by our need for justice. And the point God could have made had Abraham pushed to number one, and if you'd have been there, you'd have pushed him to number one, him or her, to number one. And I think that I would love to know what God would have said then. We'll never know, but it wasn't because God let us down. It's because Abraham did. Okay, silly me.
I think I'm looking at the word justice incorrectly.
How are you looking at it? Finger on spacebar.
More like a policy plan for the whole country.
Oh, okay.
That the rules and laws of the society are more important than the individual. So
yeah. I don't think excellent thought on your own self to kind of say maybe it's a difference of definition on that. Good thinking. Good job. There was something about Genesis that reminded me of. Oh, I think it was on the, where did I write? I wrote a note to myself. Okay, tell me, I want to know, as it wasn't on that one, it was on the one that is in number 2 place in Keith's qualified valuation of these 3 stories. And that's the one in Luke. Let's think for a bit about the Pharisee. Think. What are the attributes of the Pharisee?
Do you mean like
anybody have something good to say about a Pharisee?
Do you mean like the positive attributes or just any attributes? Or
well, we're going to start positive. I'll come back to the negative. Thank you. Yeah, good query.
Seems pretty righteous.
Self-confidence.
Upholding of the law.
Upholds law, self-confidence. Yeah. Righteous. That means the same thing as upholding the law. Yeah, to me. Anything else? Maybe you're including it, but I look at this. There's no place in the Bible that a person is told they're supposed to give all their money to noble causes. There is a call for a tithe. This guy gives more than a tithe. He's a really hefty giver. So he gives up and beyond. Anything else?
Well, I think the Pharisees also believed in an afterlife. Unlike the Sadducees, who did not, if I'm correct with that.
And that's why they're sad, you see?
Isn't the tithing rather Old Testament? And
Isn't the what?
Tithing is Old Testament.
Oh, yeah.
Jesus never says to give only a tithe.
No, he criticized people who tithe, but then aren't nice to other people. Yeah. So he talked about it, but he didn't ask for it. So these are some qualities we have here. Now, talk to me about the positive qualities of the tax collector.
Humility.
Okay.
One thing we don't know about the tax collector is if he changed his ways.
He never once apologized for being a tax collector. Who were the tax collectors? It's probably too obvious. It's probably a stupid question. Tax collectors were those who had sided with Rome rather than Israel. They were the ones who were what do you call them when a person sells out their own nation? There's a word for that.
Like a traitor?
Traitor.
They were traitors. Because they were supporting, just bought into the system. Absolutely. Well, I can make money this way. I'll do this. And so they bought into the system. So we know that. Yeah, but he doesn't apologize. There's no sense of repentance here.
I'd say the tax collector is like transparently genuine, maybe.
I like that. Transparently genuine. I need to go back and check my my Greek, but when I looked at the English that I had translated this at some time back, I was happy with it when I saw where is it? The sinner in me. I'm thinking, okay, I reckon we all have a sinner within us. There is that of us that has that tendency to not comply, to push the edge, but yeah, he's a person that says, yeah, I don't do everything right.
John David, that raises a question for me. Is there a distinction between, because I've often seen it translated as merciful for me, a sinner, the difference between me, a sinner, versus the sinner in me?
Well, to answer that question, I'll go on to somebody else with another question. I need to pull up my my Greek. I can do that while someone else raises another positive quality for our tax collector.
Hey, I just want to say thank you because I worked for the Department of Revenue for 34 years.
Now, don't be too sarcastic here. My comment about the tax collector is not in our system. You were a tax collector for your own government. You weren't being a tax collector for Russia, right?
Right.
Okay, there we go. All the difference in the world, my friend. Oh, gee. Let's see. So we're in Luke 18.
It's just that when I read that translation that says, "Oh God, be merciful to the sinner in me," it feels like there's a little bit of like, it's not me, it's the, it's the sinner in me, kind of.
That's 13, right? Merciful to me, um, in sin. I think it could very viably and appropriately, and I would not argue against me, a sinner. I could easily see how it could be that way. But I also can see, I can also see the way I chose to translate it. There's an element of validity to both of these, probably because most of the people who translate it will say, uh, me, a sinner. Uh, go with that one. I like the other one because that makes a lot of sense to me. It's easier to get a hold of that. I don't know how to deal with defining me exclusively by my shadow side. I certainly don't want to be classified by my shiny side. But my shadow side is also not a fair assessment of me. But there is in me both dark and light.
But isn't it interesting that in some ways that's the contrast here? The one person is saying, look at me as the sinner, the other person saying, look at me as the shiny, right?
Well, to a degree, yes. But on the other hand, when you look at what is Jesus really doing here, when we go through this, the natural reaction is to the way the story is told. You're going to come out feeling, boy, the good guy is the tax collector, the traitor, whose job is to rob from the poor and give to the rich. And we have more negative thoughts towards the self-righteous snob than we only see one aspect of each individual. And whenever we make a judgment about the other, we are doing the same thing the Pharisee did. We are judging Pharisee based upon our value system as it's been shaped in the story itself. So Jesus catches us in the very moment when we have plopped ourselves full square, when we think the one who's going to go home forgiven is going to be the tax collector, because he was humble. But the reality is, the story is really to put us all in that position of judging someone else, just like the Pharisee. Maybe they will both go home forgiven. Maybe neither one will go home feeling forgiven. But we've been caught. And in the storytelling, like Jesus often does, he finds a way to catch us off guard and help us see an aspect of ourselves that we just as soon not see. Now, I'm still working my brain through this one, but this really fascinates me. And once again, this way of thinking about it is better described than I could ever do in Jill Levine's. I got it all together this time, Chris. I didn't have to ask for it, but she covers this one, I think, really, really well, and it flipped an absolute change in how I view this text now, because I can see myself in that. I think, oh yeah, by George, I was always thinking was the good guy it was good guy versus bad guy, rather than recognize that just like John David doesn't want to be judged by his worst aspects, I have no right then to judge someone else by the worst aspects.
Joe has his hand up.
Oh, hi, Joe.
I think the thing that really struck me in the lesson was your little chart with the justice versus mercy, bold versus humble, and the fact that probably reality is no extreme at all. And the one word I really disliked when I was very young was the word nuance. And I'm more and more impressed with how extremes are not real and nuance is. And suddenly things get more and more complex, and I don't have them figured out. And I have to admit that.
Yeah, me too. It's the complexity of faith, the complexity of life. There's a simple side to it. The simple side is be trusting of God's ultimate goodwill and achievement. We'll get there. If it isn't all good, we haven't gotten there. There we go. Susan.
And the other thing we're talking about models
sorry.
of prayer. I keep thinking about Tevye from Fiddler on the Roof. And I think he probably has the best prayer life I've ever encountered, possibly even better than St. Thomas Aquinas.
Yes, yeah. Come on, God. I mean, those kind of conversations of not taking life for granted. And I think that would be something, Twyla, that you would probably enjoy too, that ability to speak right back to God and say, this is the way it ought to be, God, right? Yeah, I think so. That's cool. Let's switch over. Susan, you have the luck to still have time to get in yet.
So, I mean, I'll be the first one to say there's, good times when there's time to look at translations and issues with all of that. I think it can be dicey to try to read more into a parable than Jesus ever intended.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, this is Jesus talking about how we approach God, not how we approach each other. He never asked there's nothing in here saying anything about judging the Pharisee.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus in plenty of other places says, don't judge, forgive 70 times 7. So I think he's got that covered. So I think this is pretty clear. In this parable, which is meant to give a message, not to cover every realm of human behavior, the message is don't go to God with arrogance and with, putting yourself above other people. Don't do that. It will not bode well for you. And even though you are a sinner, which, I mean, that's a whole other day to talk about what sin actually is, I think, but this person was self-aware, and maybe he didn't know how to get out of it. But again, this is about how he approaches God, not how he approaches each other. I hesitate to go beyond what Jesus says clearly at the end. Those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and who humble themselves before God will be exalted.
There is a problem with the text in that some manuscripts don't have that last one there, and it is thought by others that the final conclusion of many of these parables is an addendum to the parable made by the gospel writer. But you have a good point. Is this a story about our relationship to God, or is it a story about our relationship to each other? In that, in the Shema, it is always a combination. They are always linked together. It's not one or the other. You can't love God if you don't love others. What I think Mom once said to me, you can't love God any more than you love the person you hate the most. And I've kind of been troubled by that ever since she said it. But I'm intrigued by it. But Jesus says it in the Shema when he quotes that. You will love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul. But if you do all, how do you have room for anything more? And then he said, and the other one is just like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself, which means we have to love ourselves, our neighbor, and God. You can't
Which
separate them.
the Pharisee is not doing.
But the point is not so much to pick on a Pharisee. The point is to not be judging other people when we're addressing God and wanting to not be judged. And that's something Jesus also taught in other lessons. So I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you about the general thrust of how to approach parables. You can't milk it for all it's worth, because you can easily miss what is really its main intent. But my point is the main intent is a both and, not a yes, not a one thing or another. They are linked. They can't be separated. But we can pick that up next time maybe and go see where that goes with us. Now I see that our time already gone over time. I apologize. I try to be sure to let you guys go. You want to finish the dessert from lunch, right? Okay, I know I do. Shalom, y'all.
See you later. Just a reminder that the classroom is available if people want to continue having conversations or comments there.
Sure, we'll try to continue it there. I'll try to remember to get there this time.